Thank you all so much for joining me today. This is Frank Spillers, and we are diving into mobile UX design and the process for getting differentiation right. I'm really excited to share this information with you today because I think it's some of the most important process type information that we've discovered at Experience Dynamics. And so it's kind of a secret that we're holding close to our chest, if you will, and it really comes from our practice working with clients and transforming mobile app experiences. And I need to tell you that this is something that we stumbled upon. We've been called in to redesign apps that, say, other agencies have worked on. And when we use a user-centered design process, we found that we come up with a completely different app experience. And so I wanted to share with you what it is that we did. What is this thing that is a must for differentiation in mobile applications? So I'm Frank Spillers, Chief Experience Officer of Experience Dynamics, and I've been working in the field for 20 years here, and I teach UX. I design mobile apps, websites, web apps, and I'm currently focusing on virtual reality and augmented reality. And I'm teaching a class now on that topic. If you're interested, stay tuned on the Experience Dynamics website. So let's look at the agenda for today. I have some pitfalls and lessons from the uninstall experience. You know, I think the bottom line is most mobile UX design kind of sucks. And it means that the bar is really high for getting app retention rates. They are spiraling downwards. They're kind of almost abysmal. Like 80% defection rate is normal in Android apps, which is just kind of crazy. And so user behavior becomes this thing with mobile that becomes even harder to control. Right, as a designer, a developer, or a marketer of a mobile application, it's a much trickier space where, you know, years ago it used to be the back button. Now it's just uninstall, and that lack of responsiveness from your users, you know, lack of engagement. And I think it's the way that mobile apps are approached. So we'll talk a little bit about that and 3 different strategies and tactics for tackling mobile UX design challenges. And as promised in the agenda for this webinar, I'll also be covering the part that Eric Ries missed out in his great book, Lean Startup. And so we'll look at that and then wrap up with some case studies on approaches that we've taken to transforming mobile experiences. But this isn't really when you talk about case studies, it's really the process piece here. And so that's the focus of this short webinar today. So maybe some of you are tracking the statistic, but after 90 days, the app retention rate drops down to 20%. This is a huge study that Localytics did with thousands of applications. And it starts to decrease after a few weeks. It's interesting to see the attrition sort of falls. It sort of cascades, in other words, you get the user's attention and they're either impressed with the app and they keep it, or they don't, and that's the bottom line. Now we're not going to talk about how to market the app or how to get its adoption in the App Store and things like that. That's definitely half the challenge. But what we're talking about here is if your user wants your app, how do they, what happens next? How do they actually adopt it and keep it? So I think most mobile apps and app ideas come from the napkin sketch, unfortunately. And in some cases they've been great. I mean, the app, remember when the iPhone first came out, in around 2007, I think it was, the best-selling app, the $1 million app, was the farting app. The app you push the whoopee cushion and it makes a rude sound, and the guy made $1 million on that. So those early days of kind of a cool idea have sort of quickly come to an end, and it's a lot more difficult to get your users' attention. And this becomes even doubly more important if you're playing in augmented reality, or you intend to play with augmented or mixed reality experiences, because you can do some really cool things there. But once that starts heating up as a key area of of experience for consumers and business users, the same kind of user experience issues are going to apply. So the back of the napkin, that might be a good starting point. But if you go and pitch in Silicon Valley for your mobile app idea, the first thing they'll ask you is not where's your UX, but how good is your UX. And so that's what I've noticed from that experience of helping startups pitch in Silicon Valley. They used to say, where's your user experience? Now they say, how good is it? And basically, are you a unicorn? Are you a $1 billion mobile app? I think with back of the napkin, you get like cool looking apps like this or this, or this, that to me, I'm inspired by these kind of designs, and they make a really good Behance, which is the creative sharing site. Some of you probably use it for your portfolios. They make really good Pinterest images, and you can look at other people's apps and be inspired by them as well. You should. But then if you're actually doing this, like we do this a lot in our UX practice, you realize that you can't just create beautiful looking, cool stuff. And so what do you need? Well, to me, you need differentiation. You need differentiation, and that's what we're going to talk about today, is how to get the differentiation. So, you might end up with something like this. This is from Find Nearby. I think this is Facebook. And to Facebook's credit, it took them till 2017 to actually rework this. I mean, unbelievable that for almost a decade we've had functionality like this, Find People Nearby. And it's like, why can't we get this right? Why did it take Facebook till 2017 to make this functional? And I know my teenage daughter loves it. So it's really hot apparently with teens and young people that are hanging out to meet their friends. Not that, but the new one. That's the old one. But here it is again. This is kind of my style, with sitting in an airport trying to find out what's going on with my flight, and I can discover people nearby here, and but why? I can think of some ideas, like it might be nice to get the gossip, and these ideas come from hanging out too long at airport gates, where you ask someone, hey, what's going on with this flight? I mean, that's really the emotional hook for that context, is what's going on with this flight. And if you can get some inside information, that in the United States they like to cancel flights and really mess you around, as you're traveling. So to have that gossip, really, to have the what's going on with a flight, I mean, I would just call that label right there, what's going on with a flight. By the way, some of you signed up for the collaborative UI webinar. Just a footnote: this actual slide is also covered in that webinar. And we go into more how to create interfaces that have that social hook, because I think social user experience is totally in the realm of mobile user experiences. So social and emotional is all about mobile. And your challenge is to find out what is the social and emotional trigger of your users, so that you can bake that into the user experience. Not the made up one, but the one actually that you have been able to intercept from your user's world. So let's look at some pitfalls and key lessons from uninstall behavior. It was Eric Ries, the lean startup guy, who said that he starts if you've read that book, he starts it out by talking about a failure that that they did the napkin sketch. He did that. He's had a few companies. He's an entrepreneur, and really speaks to desirability, right? If you're tracking, if you've attended any of my other webinars, you'll hear me talk a lot about desirability as that even more important than usability piece in terms of user experience strategy. And so the question is, how do you get that desirability? And that's what we're going to answer. How do you get that, what people want? Well, let's look at the state of where we're at with user adoption. Websites kind of start with this visual, what I call visual judgment. It's a snap second. It's actually 50 millisecond pre-cognitive process. So it's like before your thought actually hits your brain and goes, oh, I like the look of the site. Before that happens, you have a visual perception of, for example, credibility and ease of use. So you decide the ease of use, the perceived ease of use, before you even touch the thing. And that's really websites. And if you get past that, it goes to cognitive judgment. And I think web apps actually start there. People don't go looking for nice looking web apps. They actually have work to do. And so they're, this is like, they need it to be easy. What am I doing? Where do I go? Boom. And so I think web apps start with at that level of the user adoption lifecycle. Mobile apps, sadly, right, the bar is much higher. In other words, you can create a cool looking app, but mobile apps start with that emotional judgment, and there it is again, that word desire. So the unfulfilled desires, as Eric Ries was pointing out in that last slide there in his great quote. And it's about value proposition. Differentiation is about value proposition. What is the value proposition? How are you actually fulfilling a user's emotional and social needs? Because mobile devices are totally, like I said a few minutes ago, in that area of emotional and social needs. If you get past that, you get to intention to return and then habitual use. But this is what I call the defection or the uninstall triangle for mobile, right? This is a user adoption lifecycle that we've developed to try and understand, beginning with websites. And you can see here, the stakes start at emotional judgment, I think, for mobile, really, and that's why they're so high, and that's why defection is so high. It's a very emotional thing to uninstall an app, or to just frown at the use of an app, or to bail out. So some of the things that we know that you should be aware of. So 4-second bursts of interaction. These are based on research, and it's just the nature of mobile devices that they're used on the go, and tiny little fonts, places where you can't really see what to do, hidden things, things that you designed on desktop that don't work when you're walking out on the street. So quick fix to this, if you're a designer and you're listening to this, take your app, put it on your phone, go walk out on the street in the sunshine or whatever conditions you're in the rain, even better, and look at the design in those conditions, right, as opposed to the nice, comfortable stare of your desktop. That becomes even more of an issue with augmented reality and mixed reality, where you're wanting to actually step things out in your environment, and if there's an arrow that's pointing in that direction, you want to kind of put that arrow in your physical environment and do a lot more playing around. So high stress, jitter, movement, distraction, and this would fall into multitasking. So, being able to be pulled out of an app. This is basically where Apple is going with iOS with regard to kind of keeping the flow. They've got this sort of back to application arrow, this little subtle arrow that you can start in your mail, and you can go to Safari or another app and sort of navigate backward. And that's basically what they're trying to do, is smoothen the movement or the flow between apps. But I think the other thing here too is it's not just a physical thing; it's a cognitive thing. So when I say high stress, I mean the fact that someone's trying to find some information, they're trying to complete some type of activity, they're augmenting some task that they're doing, and so they're thinking, and the last thing they want to do is struggle with an app. Now, speed becomes really important. insanely important, especially if you're designing HTML. Uh, it's the grace period's a little higher. People are willing to wait a lot longer than I would expect them to, and but 74% not say that they're not willing to wait longer than 5 seconds, and in e-commerce it drops a little bit. Um, there are some stats from app analytics that show that that performance, the speed, is one of the key uninstall things. In other words, like, forget the design and all that. Once you go into the app, if it's slow, if things are not loading correctly, if there's some issue with the way that you've done the performance, especially if it's an HTML, app that for whatever reason hasn't been optimized, you run into problems. This is from an infographic on mobile apps that we give away, and with our mobile UX one-day class, by the way, if you're interested in learning more about mobile UX just as a wider topic. So jumping between devices, we're definitely in this era of people are moving between phones, tablets, and it's Android to iOS, iOS to Android. It's completely crossover environment. Three things here. So mobile first, right? Many of you should be familiar with this already. You're in that high context usage scenario we talked about, with lots of jitter, high stress. So large fat finger friendly, as we call it, targets. Is the takeaway there. Task first. So leveraging task-oriented design. So what are the user's tasks? Now, the point of this seminar is, how do you know what the user's tasks are? And then finally, content first down here, right? How do you know what the right content is? So it says leverage desirability. What does the user want and need? So how do you know what those things are? And outside of the usability of actually not being able to find your tasks, or losing comprehension on mobile by half, right? So you're not paying attention, basically. We find that that becomes a huge issue, right? So let's look at the three keys to mobile differentiation. The first one is task-oriented design, right? So streamlining towards the user's task, following the flow of their tasks. And that's really, really important to have that discipline up front. This is from Eric Ries. This is from the Lean Startup. And we're in the learn phase here in terms of process. So we're over here at learn. And there are a lot of things that he mentions here, but there's one missing here, right? And you won't see it on this entire list of techniques throughout the whole life cycle, from learning to building. He's got usability testing, very good, right? You definitely want to usability test. And like I said, if you're developing, you want to take a walk with your app, on the street, go to the bus stop, even just move around your own office. Don't sit there on the desktop that you designed it on. That's definitely a pro tip for you. But what's missing here is the field study. So the field study is the differentiator. This is the process differentiation technique. And why? Because the field study, which is going out into your user's environment, actually reveals distractions. It reveals that emotional and social context. And I say deep emotional context and deep social context because this is where desirability is embedded. It's embedded in the depth of a person's living room, or bathtub if the product is there, or busy work environment in the office, or factory condition, or doctor's office, or wherever it is. And it's characterized by multitasking, problem solving, and jumping or varied state usage. So people are jumping from state to state. I like this picture of this guy here. He's on a mobile phone, and it really speaks to culture, which is where the depth comes in. So there's two levels of culture. There's big culture, what I call big C, and these are some lovely doses here. We'll continue on the Indian theme, and I know we have some Indian designers and developers on the call here. Some lovely South Indian dosas. They're delicious. Now, one of the things about eating out in India is, I hear this a lot, that Americans come back and they say the food wasn't very good in India, which sounds ridiculous because Indian food is notoriously good, right? And so what's going on, I think, is in India doesn't have a restaurant culture like we have in the United States. Many cultures, same in South America. You go to South America, the food's not really that good. And I'm talking about eating out in a restaurant. In someone's home, the food is, usually outstanding. If you're invited to someone's home, or if you know somebody, or you're from this culture that you're going back home, like, of course, the food is incredible. But there's no restaurant culture. Now, the paradox here is, now if you were to take that insight and say, oh yeah, there's no restaurant culture, you also need to know that, in the big cities like Mumbai and Bangalore and so forth, there's an emerging, Western. You can find Domino's Pizza, you can find, I think Pizza Hut as well. You can find all kinds of Western McDonald's. And so very popular, but more as a status thing. People don't really find nutrition. It's the same reason why McDonald's closed in Bolivia. People liked going there in Bolivia, but they found that it wasn't nutritionally dense enough. So these are really important insights if you're in the restaurant or you're launching a product there. That's what we call big culture. So what's going on from the big cultural perspective, and you have to get super specific, and location if it's relevant, right? So it's not always relevant, but it might be West Coast, East Coast in the United States, South India, North India, definitely, but also business objectives wise. Your focus needs to be really specific with your business objectives. And maybe it shouldn't be too specific, because we've done studies where we've narrowed it to just that product or just the customers, right? And we found that when we went back a few years later and did a wider field study, a reconnaissance of the full environment, we learned all this other stuff because our focus was to the wider, field. In other words, what's happening in the wider field. So you have to be very specific. The third key is exploiting context, right? So getting on the ground, and this is a taxi. My favorite little story here is I was waiting for a taxi and the guy took like 20 minutes. I was almost late to get to the airport once. And I said to him, what's going on? What's happening? And he said, oh, it's a new system they gave us for the jobs, and it pushes the jobs down into like 3 screens deep. So he was just sitting, he said he was sitting in a church car park around the corner, just waiting, just sitting, twiddling his thumbs. He didn't realize there was a live job going on, right? So you see with the ride sharing apps, Uber and Lyft and so forth, that they've actually solved that. That's one of the main reasons why people use those apps, is the perceived efficiency of, like, you can connect with the driver, what's going on. It's certainly not the speed, because you end up waiting longer, I think, even than a regular taxi would. But knowing this stuff and sitting in the back of a taxi and observing how that the task is completed, you can exploit that context. And this is what I call little culture. That if you're launching a mobile payment app, I mean, this is really interesting. We're studying this as part of our localization course that we'll be teaching a little bit later this year. Mobile payments in the United States, mobile payments are just catching on. Maybe, Apple has built them into iOS. In countries like Denmark, they're completely cash-free. Instant pay and instant cash is everywhere. But outside of the cultural perspective, that's a big culture thing. Little culture is what the user's actually doing in their environment. So if you're in that doctor's office, if you're down on the screen, you're at the feature level, you're in the way that they think about things and complete their tasks. And so you need the big culture, the big C, but you also need little culture, the user's culture, which might not have anything to do with the national culture, but it has everything to do with the way that they want to solve their tasks. So going to where your users perform their tasks and observing is critical. So we'll just round out with just a few examples from some projects that we've worked on recently. Well, one of the things that we found, and this is from an app that we designed that's for a health application, and it's a mobile app. So we have lots of questions that we wanted to ask the user, and so very big target area, as you can see here. If they want to skip it, they can just go next. again here, and then playing with different ways, like trying to make it fun, because we're asking them to fill this out. They don't want to fill it out, so when you're asking users to do something with your app that's about you and not really about them, it's really important to make that fun. And here, how many times did you do it? And so you can see like nice, big, open, fun. One of the things that we found when we did a field study in Norway and Italy with a fitness tracker is that because of the way privacy is handled, that's a big C thing in Norway. We found that users, they have fitness trackers, but they don't necessarily wear them because they're not really a bragging kind of culture. And whereas in the U.S., people wear their fitness trackers, it's not really about bragging, but there's no shame with showing off in the U.S., where there is in Norway and many parts of Europe and many parts of the world. We found that, so even though people said, oh yeah, fitness trackers are common, didn't see anybody went to the gym, didn't, even just anecdotal after the field study, 20 people, not a single one wearing a fitness tracker. Or if they were wearing them, it was just for the activity and then it goes in the drawer. This image is from a mobile banking study where users said to us, it'd be nice to have like Car2Go. It's a mobile car sharing app. You just go find a car and you're a member of that. And so they talked about the convenience of finding their bank or credit union near that, in the same way that they find their car. We also found that they wanted, so this is a business problem of how do you do upsells? How do you sell other things to customers? And they kept referring to this example, and this is an example from USAA, and USAA almost markets these things as if it's an app. So the way that they're listed on your dashboard or your screen, it's like something you can add to it's like a collection. And users kept referring back to it as a model. Now USAA also follows up with customer service. They'll actually call you and they'll say, we noticed you're buying a car. Do you want insurance with that? And so they do a very sophisticated, customer experience management process behind the scenes with this, but it follows through to their desktop. And so we were able to utilize that strategy as well on when we designed that app. So I think that's all we have time for today. Any questions here before we wrap up? You can chat them or feel free to, the mics are open. So question, when should you conduct the field study? So the field study, so as we talked about on this webinar, the field study is the process to differentiate. When should you conduct it? Well, before you actually start sketching and before you actually start designing, and before you also start getting married to your own ideas about functionality or features. That field study is your way to ground your your value proposition and make sure that it has the emotional and social context clinging to it. The reason that I wanted to share this webinar with you today is we've noticed that when the typical agency like advertising or marketing or interactive agency will design an app and they'll use maybe a focus group, something, or they'll just use their own creative juices, or they'll conduct some survey or some type of peripheral technique. They're not going deep. They're certainly not going and living with the users. They're not going into Norwegian patients' homes and observing their activities, or intercepting the big culture or little culture. So they're not even going near culture. They don't even know that culture is something you should, that's what I'm noticing. And We've just noticed that when we do that field study, we come up with a totally different app. So usually it's at the start of the project. If you already have an existing app and you're in a redesign position, that would be the time to do it. That would be the time to do the field study as part of the redesign, as part of kind of enhancing the app and finding out what it is. But be prepared for everything to change. I think that's the thing that we've noticed is we don't mean to cause disruption with this process. It's just that the insights that come out of it are so dramatic. They're so impactful. In other words, they have that emotionally compelling differentiation that we know that we've embedded ourselves in users' habit. And remember, user adoption. We're starting at that emotional judgment stage. So. Really, really important to do this. This is ethnographic field study. That's the full sort of term for it. If you're not comfortable or you haven't done it before, you should work with someone who is seasoned, who can get you these insights very quickly. If you don't have a budget and you don't have the time, then the best thing that you can do. Like if you're sitting here and you're like, yeah, well, we don't have the money and we don't have the time. So what can you advise? I'm a designer or developer, and I'm just trying to learn from this. The best thing that you can do is to get out of your assumptions and to get into your user's world. So it's using empathy techniques. And what I mean by that is we helped a company in Kenya, in East Africa, with a mobile app. For helping farmers and sellers, they're selling their app, sellers and buyers. So there are these guys who are buying, a ton of tomatoes, 10 tons of tomatoes, and then there are these small subsistence farmers in Western Kenya who are using mobile apps, and so we were helping this organization, and the field study had already been done by another firm, but it's always harder to use somebody else's insights. It was actually IDEO that did the initial research, the field research. And, what we did is we just questioned all the assumptions as they came up. And we thought, it also helps in my case. I was born in Africa and lived there for many years. So I feel like I'm already ready to jump into the big sea, and the big culture thing. But even our client who's based in Nairobi, we had to point out to them that you're in your you're in your office in Nairobi. Your use of mobile phones in a big city in Kenya is very different to that farmer, because they mentioned something. They said, battery time is an issue. Usually people are using mobile phones in the countryside. They're sharing a phone. So it'll be one phone, and then they have to walk a couple of kilometers to get to a charging station. It's usually solar or something, and then they'll plug in, and then they'll check their prices and they'll check their transactions. And this mobile commerce is actually, it's a really big deal, and especially in the countryside. But so I was saying to them, well, imagine if you're that farmer, that woman or man, and maybe you've had a beer, maybe you're semi-literate as well. This is a reality. I'm not trying to be derogatory. This is, in fact, 50%. I showed you that stat. 50% of comprehension is dropped when anybody's looking at a mobile device, as one study showed. So that means already that we're semi-literate when we're using our phones. We're not paying attention. We're looking for big targets. We're looking to walk and talk and chew gum and use the mobile app at the same time. So getting into that empathy, like really exploring that, like what would it be like? What do we know about the users? Maybe you can't go there, but you can go there in your mind, and that's really important to do that. As much as you can. In other words, to get out of your assumptions, to get out of your Photoshop or your mobile app development assumptions, and to really empathize with the audience as much as you can, and question your assumptions. So another question here is, what should be the first step for reworking an existing app? If you're reworking an existing app, the first step should be deciding whether you've got the right tasks or not. So you should create some initial personas. Um, I'm very clear that personas come from user research, from field research. The best personas. So you have to be aware that if you're creating assumption personas, as they're called, or these placeholder personas, but essentially these are tools to help you get into that empathy that I just talked about. Start listing out your task. Start showing, okay, this is what a user wants to do. Um, Follow the task and add the task with emotion. So start with, what is the emotion that is going to uh, keep the user engaged? In other words, at that emotional judgment on the user adoption lifecycle, what is the emotion that's pulling the user to the app? And then what is the emotion that will continue to hold that user with the app? If you look at these fitness trackers like Fitbit, for example, um, you know, the emotion is, what's my data? How am I doing? Give me instant feedback. And so they use very large, beautiful infographics, like a picture of a shoe with a dial to show you've done, 5,000 steps. They give you little tips about how close that is to your goal. They put the goal in there. Many of these apps that we've looked at, specifically in fitness and performance tracking and stuff, they don't ask you what your goal is. uh, you know, um, so that's an emotional thing, is like, why am I using an app for my wellness or health? Because I'm trying to achieve a goal. Maybe I'm trying to lose weight. Maybe I'm trying to improve sleep. Maybe I'm, trying to see how I'm doing. How am I doing? And maybe the how is related to, what is your goal? And maybe you can edit your goal. A lot of these apps don't let you edit your goal. And studies that we've conducted with the users, they say it'd be nice if I could do that. So get into the emotion of what attracts, and then the emotion during the use, and then the emotion after the use. So in other words, so emotion, tasks, and then emotion again at the end. So what do you want the user to feel when they're finished? They say, oh, now I can see this, or I was able to edit that, or I was able to transact if it's e-commerce or some transactional thing, or I was able to share if it's a social media type of, social networking type of thing. Um, there are so many apps that I use during the day, productivity wise, that are just so flat that I hate to use them. We just did some research for a website that is not responsive, and it actually has an app, but nobody knows about the app. And users said they just didn't use it, and it was hard to get insight because they just got burned out. They just didn't even want to use it because it wasn't responsive, it was slow, and it's hard to search. And what we realized was that the perfect thing for them would be notifications in this context for this app. What's happening with this thing that they're monitoring? And then quickly being able to search, on the go. Things like that would have been very powerful for a mobile strategy. So starting point is, if you can talk to your users, if you can interview your users, or if you can go hang out with your users, right, then that would be the starting point. But in the absence of that, you should be very, very disciplined about what the tasks are and what the emotions are. And then you can look at it and say, are these the right tasks? Are these the right emotions? You know, um, and hopefully, and those are obviously aligned to the user. You're not just creating, apps for fun or for show. You might create something beautiful. Someone's mentioning a portfolio, creating one for a portfolio. You might create something beautiful, but if you're actually trying to get users to adopt it and make money on that app, you're going to need to show um, good UX, which means strong task orientation and an emotional differentiation. Um, the process, as we've learned today, is to get that from field studies and from going into understanding big culture and what I call little culture, the user's culture. In other words, the rules, the expectations, the things that they bring, that the environment they're using the mobile app in, what they want from that, what would really put a smile on their face, as opposed to just using some app and uninstalling it and on to the next one. So I think that's all we have time for today. I look forward to seeing you guys on a future webinar. Thank you so much. This is Frank Spillers. Feel free to email me, frank@experiencedynamics.com. You can reach me through the seminars at experiencedynamics.com. It's been a pleasure. I wish you a wonderful day, and thank you so much for your time and attention here. Appreciate your support. Be well.